Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon. We're coming to you live and virtually from the Immersion Lab at MIT.nano. This is IMMERSED. IMMERSED is our monthly seminar series to celebrate the use of AR and VR, artificial reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, digital technologies, enabling science, enabling art, enabling engineering in creative and new ways. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Deirdre Logan, who's the Director of Psychology Services in Pain Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. She's putting a phenomenal amount of very creative and clinical insight into how to use new digital technologies in the care of our youngest patients. So today, immersed in pediatrics, I turn it over to Dr. Logan. Thank you for joining us today. And participants, please feel free to chat questions, and we'll be answering in real time as we can if you have questions about technology. At the end of Dr. Logan's talk, we'll have Talis Rex, who will present a little bit about some of the technologies that we'll be bringing to bear in collaboration with Dr. Logan. And then we'll follow with a conversation where you can ask your additional questions. So with that now, Dr. Logan, please share your screen and take it away. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good morning. Hopefully everyone can see me there. Thank you for that introduction. It's great to be talking to this group today. I am really eager to present this today and get some feedback. We are very focused on the clinical side of things and how to use this technology to engage and work with our patients. So let me tell you a bit about the work that we're doing. First, I'll just briefly present some of the evidence that exists now for the use of virtual reality in pain management. I'll talk a bit about the evolution and the progress of a group that I created, which we have named the INOVATE-Pain Collaborative. This is a group of clinicians working primarily in the pediatric pain treatment space, and how we've kind of come together around these kinds of digital technology health interventions. And then I want to talk about the specific project that I'm at the very beginning stages of, which is using virtual reality to work on school reentry for kids who are in an intensive interdisciplinary pain rehabilitation. I will explain what all of that means when I get there. So again, just a bit about kind of the evidence to date. We know from some great work that's been done over the last 10 years or so that there are now very solid benefits from using virtual reality in the treatment of acute pain, meaning people who are coming in and undergoing a painful procedure, something that's kind of time limited, where they can really engage in VR as a distraction, as an immersive experience, and get them through that experience. We also have a growing literature on using virtual reality in adult chronic pain treatment applications. So for more long-lasting pain issues, a lot of work has been done in back pain, some work on rehabilitation kinds of treatments, but not a lot of randomized controlled trials. So the science isn't super tight there yet. And where we really don't have a lot of information is how these things apply in pediatrics. But we do know that children in some respects are really ideal VR consumers. They can really make use of the immersive experience. It's very familiar in terms of a video game-like environment. So we have every reason to believe that that is an excellent population to be applying these technologies. When we think a bit about how VR and other digital kinds of interventions can work in the treatment of chronic pain. So again, pain that people are dealing with day in and day out or recurrently, rather than just a situational painful experience. What's been figured out so far is that there are a few ways that VR kinds of interventions can really be helpful. One is that they can kind of amplify or extend some of the existing treatments by making them more immersive and kind of easier to get through. So an example of that is for folks who have limb pain problems, there's an approach that involves, it's called mirror therapy, involves using mirrors so that you're looking in the mirror and your painful limb is sort of getting switched in your mind with your non-painful limb, and so you can move it and kind of trick your brain in that way. VR offers a lot of ways to extend that kind of a treatment. So that's one example of how it can amplify the neuromodulating effects of movement therapies and other kinds of treatments. It can increase engagement in traditional kinds of cognitive behavioral approaches, learning relaxation strategies, doing deep breathing, muscle relaxation. You can immerse a kid or any patient in a really immersive environment and have them engage in those skills, and makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun, and there's a lot more buy-in when teaching those kinds of approaches. And then there is also what's called VRET, or virtual reality-based exposure therapy. So just like with treating phobias or PTSD, part of treating chronic pain is helping people to embrace and engage in the things that they are afraid of. They are afraid of doing their normal activities because these things have been causing them pain. Using virtual reality, we can get patients to engage in some of those movement-based kinds of activities because they're distracted and immersed in a rewarding environment, and they can do more and move their bodies more. And then once you bring their attention to that, it can help reduce that fear that goes along with that. So it's really a great component of our kind of exposure-based rehab treatment programs. So just to summarize, kind of looking at the literature, we know that VR works well with children. We're getting growing evidence that VR works for chronic pain applications. And there's some emerging support for using VR in novel ways to amplify or deliver these other well-established treatments. What we're trying to do now is really kind of get to the intersection of all of those things and really think about that space where we're dealing with children with chronic pain conditions, which we see many of in our clinical experience, and figure out how to use these kinds of technologies to amplify the treatments that we already know to work for these kids. So to that end, I sort of dove into this virtual reality space a few years ago with this idea that I will tell you about, this project to use it as a tool within the context of our intensive pediatric pain rehab program, where kids are in a program all day, every day for a period of weeks. And we're really trying to work on returning them to normal function. And again, my particular interest is in getting them back to school successfully. So I started thinking about how VR could be useful for that. It's an idea that I pitched to a funding agency that funds a lot of pediatric pain work. And they really encouraged me to reach out and make connections with others doing similar kinds of work, which is one of the things that this agency likes to do, is bring together people working on similar ideas. So that resulted in a meeting, which occurred back in January of 2020. I like to refer to it as the last business trip I took for a really, really long time, and counting still. So I was glad I got there. Our group brought together representatives from pediatric pain programs at several of the large academic medical centers. We had a VR software developer who'd been working closely with the team at Stanford on their projects in this area. So he was there to kind of help us think through things from the design side. We had a VR expert outside of the pain field, and some representatives from philanthropy who could also help us think about how to support and grow this kind of work. So it was a great opportunity to kind of hear from each other, learn about the work happening at different hospitals, figure out how we could move these kinds of projects forward on a larger scale. We named ourselves the INOVATE-Pain Collaborative, which stands for Interdisciplinary Network on Virtual and Augmented Technologies for Pain. So that's the group that kind of came together and began to think through these things and try to expand some of our projects. Our goals as a collaborative also kind of go beyond our own particular projects. We really wanted to be kind of a clearinghouse or a knowledge source where we could really help other places to implement these programs as well. So smaller hospitals, maybe without the same resources, not having to reinvent the wheel, and being able to have a place to go to kind of hear what's been done, learn about best practices for using these kinds of technologies. We also wanted to really figure out where the gaps are in what's been done and how we as a group could sort of bring new projects along to fill those gaps, and really provide and maintain a repository of resources so that, again, other institutions could come and learn from this as well. So we're working on many of those goals, unfolding over time. We've been a little slowed down with the pandemic because we have not met again. But we did put out a paper that really talked about the outcomes of our little summit meeting and some of the goals that we are hoping to pursue. So you can read more about it if you would like to hear what we're trying to accomplish. So let me talk more specifically first about what we call PRVR, or pain rehabilitation virtual reality, and then I'll get to my actual specific project. So we know that VR can be used to enhance engagement in physical therapy and occupational therapy interventions. Let me tell you a little bit about, well, it's a mouthful, but interdisciplinary pain rehab programs. As I mentioned, these are programs, these are for kids who, well, they also have adult programs, but we're in the pediatric space. These are for patients who have chronic pain conditions that have really led to quite a lot of functional disability. So they aren't able to engage in their athletic activities. Many of these kids aren't attending school regularly because of their pain. They may be experiencing kind of social impairments because they're not able to spend time with their friends. Their lives have really been upended by whatever chronic pain condition they're dealing with. It could be a musculoskeletal pain condition, such as we see something called complex regional pain syndrome quite a lot. It could be chronic headaches, it could be chronic abdominal pain. Whatever the problem is, it's become very disabling and it hasn't responded to traditional outpatient kinds of therapies. So sort of the frontline treatment for kids like this is to go to physical therapy and work with a psychologist on cognitive behavioral techniques. Sometimes kids do not improve with those outpatient therapies, and that's when they would come to a program like this, where they're there every day, all day long, in an intensive rehab setting. So in that space, you know, we have a group of therapists who are incredibly creative and really try to engage these kids, again, in kind of challenging environments where they're facing their fears. They're doing things that are causing them pain because the rehab approach really requires them to kind of move and learn to re-engage in activities in order for the pain to kind of modulate and become manageable. So the more things we can offer that really are immersive and engaging as part of that treatment, the better. Already in the programs at Stanford and at Cincinnati Children's, they've really integrated VR into their PT and OT, physical therapy and occupational therapy interventions. They've used some commercially available kinds of programs, and then the software developer who was part of our pain collaborative had developed a program specifically for this population called 30 Feet. So what he did, I think I have more slides on this. What he did was he sort of immersed himself in the rehab program and visited the program for several weeks and really watched what kids were being asked to do in their physical and occupational therapy sessions and how they were being asked to move their bodies, use their painful limb, to do different things. And then he created this particular video game-like application that really requires kids to move their affected parts of their bodies. So primarily it involves, moving your legs to stomp on fruits and vegetables. Or if it's a kid with upper body extremity pain, you can alter it so that they're using their arms. But they're engaged in this video game and they're engaging in these movements without being quite as aware or afraid of what they're doing. And they're using that within the context of guided physical therapy. So you can see also, there's lots of controls and ways you can customize it for any particular kid and any particular set of physical therapy goals. So the folks at Stanford who've kind of moved this along the furthest have published some initial outcomes of this work. And they've really demonstrated that kids engaging in the 30 Feet experience are reporting, being highly present within that virtual environment. They're reporting decreases in pain after, repeated engagement in this game, decreases in their fear and their avoidance of painful kinds of experiences, and decreases in their functional limitations. So they're able to do more after having done this for a number of sessions in the context of intensive pain rehab. The clinicians who've been involved in this have observed fewer what we call pain behaviors. So less, kind of protecting a painful area or, making sort of noises about, to indicate pain, groans or things like that, grimacing expressions. The clinicians have sort of felt that some of those pain behaviors have decreased as kids are more engaged in doing this. So from that, the group has concluded that PRVR for youth is engaging and feasible, and it yields positive changes in rehab goal domains. So it's really quite a useful technology to employ in this setting. All right, so now we get to kind of what I am up to. As I mentioned, I am really interested particularly in getting kids back to school. This has been a primary research interest of mine throughout my nearly 20 years of working in pediatric pain. We see a lot of kids with chronic pain who really aren't able to function in the school setting. So lots and lots of missed school, absences from school, or having to leave school early or getting to school late because of their pain. Even kids who are able to attend school report a lot of interruption in their academic progress or other challenges in the school setting because of the challenges created by their pain. So I've spent a lot of time thinking and working on this and trying to understand why some kids with pain are able to function in school and others aren't, and what we can do to kind of get kids who struggle back in the school setting as fully as possible. And this is the idea and the goal that really brought me to the VR space. What happens now in our intensive rehab program is that we work on school. These are kids coming to us from all over the country, so we can't necessarily have our clinical team going to their schools with them. We work on school functioning in the context of the program. We try to, create sort of simulated school experiences. So we might have a kid out in the hallway, and we'll, bring other people out in the hallway and try to simulate like a crowded hallway while kids are passing between classes and try to get a kid comfortable with that. Or we'll load up a heavy backpack and have them try to go up and down the stairs in the hospital. So we try as much as possible in the environment we have to recreate some of those challenges. And I have been thinking, can't we do better with, some novel technology to really put kids more realistically in a school situation and really kind of throw some of these challenges at them while they have the support and the intervention of a set of clinical experts working with them, both to deal with the physical pieces as well as the anxiety and kind of psychological distress that the situation will cause for them. So I really felt like VR would offer tools for creating a more realistic, immersive type of school simulation, as well as letting us really customize the intervention to target each patient's specific hurdles that they identify around returning to school. I've been partnering on this with some co-investigators who are also clinicians in the rehab program. One of the occupational therapists who does a lot of the school treatment and simulations as part of her work there, and then our medical director, Dr. Neville Sethna, as well. So a little bit more about sort of the, what underlies this idea and why I think it would be effective. As I've mentioned, we know that fear and avoidance play major roles in how much school impairment we see in kids with complex chronic pain problems. So the more kids are kind of afraid of going to school, the more they sort of identify that they are trying to avoid things that cause pain in the school setting, the more we see obviously that they're missing school or really not functioning to their capacity in that setting. Improving school functioning after discharge from pain rehab has major implications for long-term functioning. So of all the things we can get kids to do as part of this program, the one that really seems to kind of keep them on track long-term is if we can get them back into school fully when they leave. It just really sets the stage for kind of adaptive functioning going forward. So it's a hugely important treatment goal. As I mentioned, kids are coming to us from all over the country and even other countries. And even locally, it would take a lot of time for our clinical staff to leave the program and accompany a kid to a school and do what we call live exposures to their actual school environment. So that limits kind of the real world generalizability of what we do try to do within the context of the program, which is where I think VR could come in and make it all more effective and realistic. So the aim of the project that I have been working on is to develop and test a virtual or augmented reality simulated school experience for use in pediatric pain rehabilitation programs. Again, it's really important that this is an exposure, an intervention that gets delivered in the environment of intensive pain rehab. It's not that kids would go do this at home. They would be there with therapists who are able to kind of help them work on the hurdles as they experience them. It would incorporate individualized physical challenges of school. So, certain kids with headaches complain more about the lights in school. Kids with limb pain problems really are often afraid of the crowded hallways. Stairs are often a problem, but you could customize so that a kid, can identify the things that are most physically challenging for them, and then we can bring those pieces forward in the experience. And similarly, we can individualize the social and emotional challenges of school. Lots of kids have a hard time coping with other kids asking invasive questions when they return from this program where they've been for weeks, kids asking them, where were you? What did you do? I don't understand what was wrong with you. Or interacting with teachers, having to go up to a teacher and ask for the work that they've missed. Different components of kind of the social and emotional part of the day trigger anxious and avoidant responses in different kids. So being able to customize that piece as well would be really powerful. So kind of thinking through what this would look like, we've sort of envisioned an iterative approach to getting to where we want to go. The first step, which is where we are currently operating, is to conduct some focus groups with current and recent patients, really asking them to kind of identify what the biggest fears and hurdles are in going back to school, or even in being at school before they came to the program, so we can understand how the program did or didn't help to address those fears and hurdles. And getting that information directly from groups of patients, we hope to really inform what are the most important components to include in this type of intervention. So we have run one sort of practice focus group. We're scheduling another one, hopefully for a little bit later this month, and then we'll run a couple more in early November, and really hope that we can get some good feedback that will help us really target the right pieces of a school experience. Once we have that, we hope to kind of work on content development, and that's where the folks in the lab here come in, is helping to sort of move it forward there. And then get, a sort of a pilot level exposure that we can work with patients on and get some feedback on what they think about that, and kind of tweak things and move forward from there. So again, keeping the stakeholders really involved, going back to the patients a couple of different times in this process and really seeing if this is something that they find engaging and useful is a really important piece of this. I don't want to create something that then isn't really meaningful and helpful to the patient population. So we hope to really have their feedback as part of the design. So what we've been talking about with the folks in the lab here is really using like the Matterport scanning and other technologies to create a realistic school setting. We can't necessarily film everybody's actual schools, but trying to kind of really incorporate those pieces that make it feel familiar and bring forth the challenges that the kids find in that setting. Making it interactive and choice-based so that, again, a kid could choose, well, today I'm going to go in this and I'm going to go to my locker and, deal with the crowded hallway and talking to other kids as I get stuff out of my locker. And then perhaps the next time I go into this experience, I might go into a classroom and have to interact with a teacher, or have to sit and take a test that I don't feel ready for because I was out for several weeks. And you can sort of let them sort of choose and go in different directions as they experience this. I'd also like to get information as kids are experiencing this. So getting some probes to obtain ratings of anxiety as they're at different points in the exposure, maybe ratings of how intense their pain is as they're navigating these challenges. And either within the experience or having sort of the clinicians working with them, prompting to try to use different coping strategies. Okay, you're feeling really anxious as you're sitting here waiting for a test. What can you do to get through this? Let's use some of your cognitive behavioral techniques. Let's work on some breathing exercises to try to cope and see if that can make you feel less anxious in this setting. So really giving them a realistic chance to practice some of those skills that we hope they will bring back to their actual school experience. There's a lot of words on this slide. So we had sort of envisioned this initially as kind of, again, like a choose your own adventure where they can go through different things. This is some feedback from the initial software engineer who's been part of our INOVATE-Pain consortium. He's now kind of moved his focus to other things. So that's why I've come to work with folks here. But the idea, again, that, you might start out in front of the school, watching students go past you, have to sort of, work up the nerve to go into the school, get in, sort of move through the school space, choose where you're going, and have interactions with humans throughout that, asking questions that might be stressful to you, or talking to you in ways that might be anxiety provoking. And again, getting ratings of that as you go. So just a little bit of an example of what it would feel like. What we hope to do to really understand how effective this is to compare the outcomes of school functioning after discharge in individuals who engage in the VR versus those who get our standard pain rehab treatment with the sort of OT-based school simulation that we do incorporate in the program. So seeing if this really does offer more and more realistic kinds of school treatment while they're in the program. We would assess, first of all, feasibility of implementing this. And then we hope to look at school attendance rates in the months after discharge from the program, school performance in terms of whether kids feel like they're back and able to perform up to their ability, whether they're getting grades that they feel are similar to the grades they had before their pain problem, or feeling like they can focus and attend in their classes. Also importantly, kind of how they feel about their own ability to be in school, so their school self-image or their perceived competence in the school setting. And then also aspects of pain-related avoidance and fear, whether they're feeling less afraid of being in the school environment. Those will be some of the outcomes that we hope we can see some change on with this intervention. And then in terms of, where we see this really making a difference, I do think it can really enhance our approaches to patient care in the context of our pain rehab treatment. It really does kind of innovate and let kids be engaged and immersed in a level that we don't currently offer. Having worked within this consortium, the INOVATE-Pain Consortium, I'm pretty confident that if we're able to develop this and use it within our rehab setting, it's something that will be adopted by other pediatric pain rehab programs through the country. So there definitely would be some uptake within this group, and then hopefully from there to other pain rehab programs. Not that there are really that many of these programs in the country. There are perhaps 10 or 12, but I think that we will sort of lead the way here. And we hope from kind of getting this initial proof of concept project going that we can seek some additional funding and really scale up the intervention so that it is something we can deliver as part of our clinical care ultimately. And then of course, what we really hope is that this will improve school function after discharge, because again, as I said, that really sets kids on a course for much better long-term functioning and recovery from their pain. So that's kind of what I've got. I can turn it over to you guys. I know you have some slides to sort of talk about the development side of things. So.
Thank you, Deirdre, for that overview. I think it's really cool to see a lot of these technologies being implemented for a lot of this kind of work for interventions and therapy. So very, very cool. It's not just for gaming. So let me see if I can share my screen now. Just first and foremost, Deirdre, we were very excited. The Immersion Lab is very excited to kind of collaborating with Boston Children's to really make this happen. We really do have quite of an extensive variety of tools that we can utilize to create such an immersive experience. And we really look forward to seeing where we can get to later on down the road. So I'm just going to go quickly over a little of the tools that we'll be implementing for the simulation. We have a variety of software tools that we'll be implementing, but we are going to be using this for the Oculus Quest 2. So this will be a virtual reality experience where we can bring the user in pretty easily and have them be immersed in the experience pretty quickly. So in terms of the tools for immersive experiences, it is going to be built in Unity, which is a very popular game engine utilized for a lot of the game development practices, but also for immersive experiences and VR and AR. So Unity will be the engine which the experience will run. We'll also be using Blender. Blender is a 3D modeling software, very powerful for creating assets, animations, and utilizing a lot of the objects that we built and implement them into the game engine of Unity. So this will be a really good interaction there. The Matterport, which Deirdre kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, this we'll be kind of experimenting with for our environmental scans. So we can take this and go from room to room and capture some real photorealistic scenes and textures. And I will kind of highlight a little bit of some new developments in that area where could be used for not only VR simulations, but to create some complex objects and scenes without kind of the use of modeling it yourself. And then we are thinking about using our OptiTrack system, so our motion tracking, to add to the liveliness of the animations of these avatars. So we will capture motion tracking data from someone in a mocap suit, and be able to translate that into the avatar without having to manually rig it to depict on what we want the avatar to do in terms of movement. And then we also believe that spatial audio is going to be very important for this. When you hear all of the chatter in the hallways, for example, or the bell, we really want to be able to immerse the experience, not just visually, but through audio as well, to really capture that essence. So again, we built this in Unity, and we are still pretty early on in the development, and I'll kind of introduce the team a little bit later on in terms of who's developing this. But we are using Unity, and we're going through the high definition render pipeline. Our idea here is to really address the realism that we can capture in Unity and present almost a real life-like situation and scenario. And so this environment that you see, this image here with the rocks and the trees, we want to really capture the detail here. Have the user feel like they're very immersed in the experience. So a few of our main scenes will be kind of a main entrance. So you have people waiting before they go into the school, just as if we used to do. We have a hallway scene, so where Deirdre mentioned kind of that crowded scene with the students walking around. It's a busy situation where everyone's trying to run to the class and you got to get to your locker. We really want to capture that in this as well. And then the classroom. We do want you to be able to kind of go into the classroom, maybe have some icebreakers or some interactions with the teacher to all really put the story together. So these are just kind of the three main scenes that we'll be developing. Again, we're still pretty early on, but we want to really capture these to kind of move forward. And then for the interactions, we're thinking of self-assessments. So Deirdre kind of mentioned all of the different things that we could measure during the experience, all the way from pain to anxiety. And we want to keep this in the immersive reality environment. So we do want users to be able to choose certain assessments and their ratings on a lot of these metrics within the virtual reality simulation. So we'll create a nice user-friendly design. We're thinking using the controllers to actually pick your record, or we were thinking of hand tracking. So there's a lot of different ways we can think about interacting with certain objects and the UI in the scene itself. We also wanted to think of the locomotion as well. And so do we want them to actually physically walk around? Do we want them to use the joystick to kind of navigate through the environment, or do we want to use portals? So we're kind of dabbling between those three, but it looks like, in terms of locomotion, we can go in any direction depending on what the development looks like and the feedback that we get from both Deirdre's team and what we are able to do. And then, of course, interacting with specific objects placed in the scene. So let's say opening up your locker, opening up doors, picking up certain pieces of paper, books, all of this kind of stuff to really immerse them in this simulation to all put the story together again. And this is just another image of that locomotion teleportation. So this is already developed. We can put this into VR. We might need to go to some remote rendering capabilities to really optimize the performance and not take that away from the user. But again, we want to still capture that realism there. And this would be an example where students are going to class, and maybe this is your turn to actually walk into the school. So in this situation, you'll be able to get acclimated into VR, get accustomed to the locomotion and the objectives later down the road, and then essentially you'll walk into this portal, open up the door, what have you, and then you go into the hallway and start the experience. So again, this could be seen as kind of the tutorial scene, but again, this is still pretty part of the experience where you hear the bell, it's time to go, time to get to class. So all of these pieces together will really capitalize on that. We'll also be using our Lenscloud, our photogrammetry. So this is a 3D scanner that allows us to create some realistic objects of real world objects without needing to build them, let's say in Blender. We can use this system to capture texture and change kind of the geometry a little bit depending on what we want. and we'll be able to really create realistic assets to import into this scene. And so we can scan individuals for realistic avatar creation in case we want people to themselves to be seen into the environment, or have a professor, their professor. So we can all go in that direction, but we can also do this with objects as well. So chairs, tables, all of that to really put these scenes together. And this is just a Matterport, just to revisit this, because I do think this could be a pretty valuable technology that we use. So Matterport could be used for the classroom references, or we can use this new package, MatterPack, which combines this 3D depth data and creates a 3D object mesh, an OBJ file, and we can then utilize that for the environments themselves. So again, we might not need to build these environments ourselves within Unity or Blender. We can capture, maybe tweak things in other third-party softwares like Revit, or some other Autodesk software, but really capitalize on this Matterport scanner to make this creation even more realistic. And a lot of 3D developers and VR enthusiasts are using this technology already to create 3D models of real-world places. So traditionally, this would be able to capture rooms in a 360 kind of camera environment, and then you choose which place you want to go to. So it allows for a little bit more of an interactive tour-based setting. But in this case, we would be actually exporting this as a 3D object and using this as our base. And so maybe we could scan some empty classrooms at MIT or Boston Children's, or really capitalizing on different classrooms or scenarios or scenes. And motion tracking, again, for the virtual avatar. This clip, for example, we use for our fencing simulation, but we can absolutely use the same technology for avatar movements, picking up objects, or having the teacher interact with the students. A lot of these interactions would take quite a bit of time to do manually, but if we can extract the data that we get from the motion capture data and put it into an avatar, that would definitely increase the speed at which we can optimize, change, tweak, and all that stuff. So this right here on the left is someone in a suit, and we skeletonized their bodies and the tracking system, and they're just moving around. Right now, they're lunging as if they were with a sword, but you could imagine having a teacher point at a board, having students interact with each other, and utilizing this technology to then import that into the Unity project. So this could add a lot more of that realism, because if you see a lot of clunkiness in terms of someone reaching for objects, that might break the immersion. So the whole idea is to keep the realism and really translate what we naturally see in the physical world and implement that into the virtual. And lastly, we kind of talk about the spatial audio. So our plan is to use Wise. Wise is a sound engine that is very popular in Unity games. It does a great job in terms of being able to utilize the spatial sound quality in the VR headset. So depending on where you're looking or how far away you are from a certain object, we can really capitalize on that to bring in that realism again. And so some of the audio cues that we were thinking of was the school bell, of course, and the classroom bell. So when you're in the hallway and you hear the bell, you got to get to class. All of these different elements that really make it real, if you will. Lockers maybe shutting, student chatter and crosstalk as you're walking through. Audio conversing with other avatars. So if you're talking to let's say a student, are they responding? So we can use a little bit of language processing in this project as well. That's not out of the scope. And then the portal pings. So maybe when you walk into a portal, you get an indicator of you went into the next room. So the sound will give you that experience. And then maybe when a UI element opens up, you'll hear a lot of your clicks, so you know you're getting that feedback. In terms of VR, audio can be very, very important to really capture that. And lastly, I just kind of want to go over the team. So of course you met Brian and Deirdre and Praneeth over here. But with the developers, we did bring on Trevor and Christian, and they are absolutely great game developers and an awesome help with this project. They're going to be valuable assets, and I'm really looking forward to working with them and to create this experience for Deirdre and Boston Children's and possibly other institutions and clinicians as well. So very excited to kind of continue this project and see what this team can come up with. So that's about it. And then I think now's the time to do a discussion, maybe answer some questions, and we appreciate your attentiveness.
First of all, for Deirdre, thank you very much. Great talk and overview and sort of presenting the clinical challenges and the clinical needs. And Talis, thank you for giving that the technology backdrop. So participants, please feel free to raise your hands or chat. But Deirdre, I want to kick off with a first question in terms of like, how does this mesh with the school systems? Like, is there sort of a role for the how does this met with the educators? Is this something that the schools should be taking on in some way, or is it the future, or how does that work?
It's a great question. It's something I've sort of struggled with for a long time. We typically, from a clinical perspective, we typically reach out to each kid's school as we are working with these kids in a program, talk about what they've done, talk about what the challenges are going to be, getting them back into school. So this could help us really probably fine tune that process, have even more detail about the situations and just how anxious they are with different things, so that schools are really aware and kind of know what kids need when they get there. It's a challenge to get schools to really have a whole process for this because they don't see that many kids with chronic pain. So every time I work with a school, they've maybe had this happen once or twice. So there's a lot of kind of re-education that goes on. It may be that this can have some applications where we can, just demonstrate to schools more clearly and more visually, these are the things that kids are grappling with. But right now it's really kind of a case-by-case individual reaching out, figuring out who the right person is in any given school to really work with. And that, takes a lot of time and is a challenging process.
Is there, so you're addressing particular sort of pain and sort of anxiety of getting back to school, but is there a COVID or post-pandemic sort of role of the technology? So so certainly children, certainly my own sort of had some anxiety in getting back to school. Can you imagine, are there other pathways or other use cases, like once you develop the technology pipeline that would really merit the schools sort of embracing this in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, in psychology, we talk about the whole concept of school avoidance or school refusal. And there are lots of different reasons that drive school refusal for different kids, different things that are triggering anxiety in the school setting. And so, yes, this could be used, I think, with a lot of different populations beyond chronic pain to really tackle school anxiety and help kids through an exposure that really helps get them back in the school setting. So in that sense, I think schools really should buy into this approach.
So there was somebody chatted here directly in terms of the questions related to privacy, or sort of if we need to scan schools, the issues associated with security and privacy of getting the physical architecture.
Right. I think we'll probably have to use a generic space or a space that we get approval of. Again, we're not able to go and show up at a bunch of different schools and film actual students because that does involve a lot of red tape for very good reasons. So, there's a trade-off between just how tailored and realistic and, how close we can get to anybody's real school experience and working with a, confined set of actual physical spaces.
And the beauty of the Matterport is once you capture that scan, you can utilize in the fact that it exports as a object. You can actually change it depending on what you want. So you can edit it, you can take things out, bring things in. So you can make some iterations of different classrooms. So it doesn't need to be exactly the same. We can always tweak things if we want. So we also have that solution as well.
What do you see as the biggest challenges then, Deidre? Is it the technology? Is it the where are the biggest pitfalls that need to be overcome to?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, definitely the technology is a piece of it, because I have these ideas, but I don't know what to do with them. That's why I'm here working with you guys. Another one that's been a surprise to me is just how hard it is to bring innovative technology into a large bureaucratic hospital setting. So, I went to this meeting. I heard exactly what other programs were doing with VR in terms of integrating it into physical therapy and occupational therapy. And I came back and said, all right, we're going to start buying the headsets and have them there for our clinicians to start using. And that has not happened because we have a compliance office that says, that's not in the handbook of what gets, what's billable for rehab therapy. And until you can show me 20 published papers that show that this is standard care, you can't do that. So the only way to bring the technology in really is through a research protocol that has IRB approval and start that way, while we kind of build the literature ourselves and have other people are building it so we can sort of make it more standard care. But it's a little bit stymieing because, this is Boston Children's, we're supposed to be the innovators, and yet we still kind of run into these, no, you can't do that unless you can show me 20 published papers that say it's okay. So that's a hurdle.
What about, I guess the last question that I have, there was somebody that I think they chatted and had to leave, related to the IRB, sort of the Institutional Review Board process to do this type of research experiment on children. How does that play out?
Well, I'm in a good position because I'm actually a member of the IRB, so I know how it works, and they're pretty nice to me. So I have an IRB. This project is IRB approved, where through the point of kind of proof of concept and showing a group of kids that first developed product, and then when we do a larger trial, we'll have to go back again. But I mean, luckily the Children's Hospital IRB is very used to research happening on children, and there are lots of federal regulations about that, but we're pretty familiar with how to work them. And honestly, compared to drug trials, people feel pretty comfortable that there's really nothing risky happening here. The biggest risk I think with VR is that some people get motion sick, so you have to tell them that might happen. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward.
Praneeth or Talis, any other from a technology intersection between technology and sort of the clinical use cases here? Any other comments or questions you wanted to throw into the conversation here?
I mean, with the motion sickness, Deirdre, we do have different strategies on how to eliminate that. Some are better than others, and depending on the individual's sensitivity to motion sickness. So there's ways of kind of keeping someone grounded within the environment in the physical world while they're in the VR space, even a simple circular rug under them so they can actually feel with their feet that they're still placed within an area. Sometimes even just having fans in the room so they have kind of a haptic cue of what direction they're pointing at. In the hardware or in the software side, even just graying out some of the peripherals as they're moving can sometimes help as well. So we'll definitely kind of go through each and every one of them to make sure that on the development side, we still get our realism, but we also want to eliminate the VR sickness that we tend to see sometimes with kind of a variety of users, and in your case, kids. So we'll definitely keep that in mind during our development process.
And just to add to that, the technology for creating immersive experience is also improving quite a lot. So for example, current headsets refresh at around 60 hertz, and they're making these new, more expensive, but new headsets that refresh at 120 hertz, which create a more seamless experience in the immersive environment. So gradually we are bringing those technologies to the lab, and using those could also probably help with the motion sickness.
Excellent. And as I mentioned, in this vision, we will always have clinicians and research team members there to really, make sure kids are engaging safely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think with that, so Deirdre, I want to give you another sort of applause and a thank you for identifying a very sort of compelling and fascinating sort of use case. And it's not all about gaming; it's sort of having impact on people's lives. Thank you again, and Praneeth and Talis, thank you for giving the technology backdrop. So for today, that concludes Immersed. So next month, coming back, we'll have probably to be confirmed, but we'll have a discussion around one of the projects out of the MIT IBM Watson AI lab projects. Details to follow, so stay tuned in your inbox. And again, the Immersion Lab is a central facility for the technologies and the uses that you see here and the ideas that you have. Reach out to us, let us know. We're here to support you, support your education interests, your research interests. And with that, have a stay safe and have a good remainder of your day. So thank you again, Deirdre.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.